Professor Rose, here with another boring math lecture to put you to sleep. Today we are reading from The Number Concept, Its Origin and Development by Levi Leonard Conant. Chapter 1. Counting. Among the speculative questions which arise in connection with the study of arithmetic from a historical standpoint, the origin of number is one that has provoked much lively discussion and has led to a great amount of learned research among the primitive languages of the human race. A few simple considerations will, however, show that such research must necessarily leave this question entirely unsettled, and will indicate clearly that it is, from the very nature of things, a question to which no definite and final answer can be given. Among the barbarous tribes whose languages have been studied, even in a most cursory manner, none have ever been discovered which did not show some familiarity with the number concept. The knowledge thus indicated has often proved to be most limited, not extending beyond the numbers 1 and 2, or 1, 2, and 3. Examples of this poverty of number knowledge are found among the forest tribes of Brazil, the native races of Australia and elsewhere, and they considered in some detail in the next chapter. At first thought, it seems quite inconceivable that any human being should be destitute of the power of counting beyond 2. But such is the case, and in a few instances, languages have been found to be absolutely destitute of pure numeral words. The Chiquitos of Bolivia had no real numerals whatever, but expressed their idea for one by the word etama, meaning alone. The Takanas of the same country have no numerals except those borrowed from Spanish or from Aymara or Peno, languages with which they have long been in contact. A few other South American languages are almost equally destitute of numeral words, but even here, rudimentary as the number sense undoubtedly is, it is not wholly lacking, and some indirect expression or some form of circumlocution shows a conception of the difference between one and two, or at least between one and many. These facts must, of necessity, deter the mathematician from seeking to push his investigation too far back toward the very origin of number. Philosophers have endeavored to establish certain propositions concerning this subject, but, as might have been expected, have failed to reach any common ground of agreement. Whewell has managed that such propositions as that 2 and 3 make 5 are necessary truths, containing in them an element of certainty beyond that which mere experience can give. Mill, on the other hand, argues that any such statement merely expresses a truth derived from early and constant experience. And in this view, he is heartily supported by Tyler. But why this question should provoke controversy is difficult for the mathematician to understand. Either view would seem to be correct according to the standpoint from which the question is approached. We know of no language in which the suggestion of number does not appear, and we must admit that the words which give expression to the number sense would be among the early words to be formed in any language. They express ideas which are at first wholly concrete, which are of the greatest possible simplicity, and which seem in many ways to be clearly understood even by the higher orders of the brute creation. The origin of number would, in itself, then, appear to lie beyond the proper limits of inquiry, and the primitive conception of number to be fundamental with human thought. In connection with the assertion that the idea of number seems to be understood by the higher orders of animals, the following brief quotation from a paper by Sir John Lubbock may not be out of place. Leroy mentions a case in which a man was anxious to shoot a crow. To deceive this suspicious bird, the plan was hit upon of sending 2 men to the watch house, one of whom passed on while the other remained, but the crow counted and kept her distance. The next day 3 went, and again she perceived that only 2 retired. In fine, it was found necessary to send 5 or 6 men to the watch house to put her out in her calculation. The crow, thinking that this number of men had passed by, lost no time in returning. From this, he inferred that crows could count up to 4. Lichtenberg mentions a nightingale which was said to count up to 3. Every day he gave it 3 mealworms, one at a time. when it had finished one, it returned for another. But after the third, it knew that the feast was over. According to my bird nesting recollections, which I have refreshed by more recent experience, if a nest contains 4 eggs, one may safely be taken, but if 2 are removed, the bird generally deserts. Here, then, it would seem as if we had some reason for supposing that there is sufficient intelligence to distinguish 3 from 4. An interesting consideration arises with reference to the number of the victims allotted to each cell by the solitary wasps. One species of Ammophila considers 1 large caterpillar enough. One species of Eumenes supplies its young with 5 victims, another 10, 15, and even up to 24. The number appears to be constant in each species. How does the insect know when her task is fulfilled? Not by the cell being filled, for if some be removed, she does not replace them. When she has brought her complement, she considers her task accomplished, whether the victims are still there or not. How, then, does she know when she has made up the number 24? Perhaps it will be said that each species feels some mysterious and innate tendency to provide a certain number of victims. This would, under no circumstances, be any explanation, but it is not in accordance with the facts. In the genus Eumenes, the males are much smaller than the females. If the egg is male, she supplies 5. If female, 10. Does she count? certainly this seems very like a commencement of arithmetic. Many writers do not agree with the conclusions which Lubbock reaches, maintaining that there is, in all such instances, a perception of greater or less quantity rather than any idea of number. But a careful consideration of the objections offered fails entirely to weaken the argument. Example after example of a nature similar to those just quoted might be given, indicating on the part of animals a perception of the differences between 1 and 2, or between 2 and 3 and 4, and any reasoning which tends to show that it is quantity rather than number which the animal perceives will apply with equal force to the Chiquito and the Australian. Hence, the actual origin of number may safely be excluded from the limits of investigation, and for the present be left in the field of pure speculation. A most inviting field for research is, however, furnished by the methods of counting and of giving visible expression to the idea of number. Our starting point must be, of course, sign language, which precedes spoken speech, and which is so convenient and so expressive a method of communication that the human family, in all its developed branches, never wholly lays it aside. It may, indeed, be stated as a universal law that some practical method of numeration has in every nation or tribe preceded the formation of numeral words. Practical methods of numeration are many in number and diverse in kind, but one method of counting, which seems to have been almost universal throughout all time, is the finger method. It is a matter of common experience and observation that every child, when he begins to count, turns instinctively to his fingers, and with these convenient aids as counters, tallies off the little number he has in mind. This method is at once so natural and obvious that there can be no doubt that it has always been employed since the first appearance of the human race in remote antiquity. All research among peoples has tended to confirm this view, or confirmation needed of anything so patent. Occasionally, some exception to this rule is found, or some variation such as is presented by the forest tribes of Brazil, who, instead of counting on the fingers themselves, count on the joints of their fingers. The variety in practical methods of numeration observed among many races is so great that any detailed amount of them would be almost impossible. In one region, we find sticks or splints used. In another, pebbles or shells. In another, simple scratches or notches cut in a stick. In another, kernels or little heaps of grains. In another, knots on a string, and so on, in diversity of methods almost endless. But back of all these devices, and forming a common origin to which all may be referred is the universal finger method, the method with which all began and which all find too convenient to ever relinquish entirely. Any such mode of counting, whether involving the use of the fingers or not, is to be regarded simply as an extraneous aid in the expression or comprehension of an idea which the mind cannot grasp or cannot retain without assistance. At first thought, there would seem to be no good reason for any marked uniformity of method in finger counting. Observation among children fails to detect any such thing. The child beginning with almost entire indifference on the thumb or on the little finger of the left hand. My own observation leads to the conclusion that very young children have a slight, though not decided, preference for beginning with the thumb. Experiments in 5 different primary rooms in the public schools of Worcester, Massachusetts, showed that out of 206 children, 57 began with the little finger, and 149 with the thumb. But the fact that nearly 3/4 of the children began with the thumb and but 1/4 with the little finger is really far less significant than would appear at first thought. Children of this age, 4 to 8 years, will count in either way, and sometimes seem at a loss themselves to know where to begin. In one schoolroom where this experiment was tried, the teacher incautiously asked one child to count on his fingers while all the other children in the room watched eagerly to see what he would do. He began with the little finger, and so did every child in the room after him. In another case, the same error was made by the teacher, and the child first asked began with the thumb. Every other child in the room did the same, each following, consciously or unconsciously, the example of the leader. The results from these two schools were, of course, rejected from the totals which are given above, but they serve an excellent purpose in showing how slight is the preference which very young children have in this particular. So slight it is that no definite law can be postulated of this age, but the tendency seems to be to hold the palm of the hand downward and then begin with the thumb. The writer once saw a boy about 7 years old trying to multiply 3 by 6, and his method of procedure was as follows. Holding his left hand with his palm down, he touched with the forefinger of his right hand the thumb, forefinger, and middle finger successively of his left hand. Then, returning to his starting point, he told off a second 3 in the same manner. This process he continued until he had obtained 6 3s, and then he announced his results correctly. If he had been a few years older, he might not have turned so readily to his thumb as a starting point for any digital count. The indifference manifested by very young children gradually disappears, and at the age of 12 or 13, the tendency is decidedly in the direction of beginning with the little finger. Fully 3/4 of all persons above that age will be found to count from the little finger toward the thumb, thus reversing the proportion that was found to obtain in the primary school rooms examined. The place occupied in the intellectual development of man by finger counting and by the many other artificial methods of reckoning, pebbles, shells, knots, the abacus, etc., seems to be this: the abstract processes of addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and even counting itself present to the mind a certain degree of difficulty. In the elaborate calculating machines of the present, such as are used by life insurance actuaries and others having difficult computations to make, we have the extreme of development in the direction of artificial aid to reckoning. But instead of appearing merely as an extraneous aid to a defective intelligence, it now presents itself as a machine so complex that a high degree of intellectual power is required for the mere grasp of its construction and method of working. Thank you so much for tuning into today's lecture on counting. I hope to see you soon.